From phantom letters to vanished colonies, these chilling mysteries have defied time, logic, and explanation, each one a haunting reminder that some questions are never meant to be answered. 15. The Petrified Rock Curse, a souvenir too dangerous to keep. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than a piece of ancient wood, turned to stone over time and preserved by nature. But for years, those who took pieces of petrified rock from certain places, especially Arizona's Petrified Forest National Park, have reported something far more unsettling than a simple souvenir. Park rangers began noticing an odd pattern. Rocks taken from the forest would sometimes find their way back, mailed in by people who had once visited and brought a piece home. Alongside the packages were handwritten letters, and nearly all of them carried the same message: regret. People claimed they had experienced streaks of bad luck after taking the rocks, lost jobs, strained relationships, financial hardships, accidents, illnesses, and in some cases, a string of unfortunate events they couldn't seem to shake. Many believed the misfortune had started the moment they pocketed the stone and brought it home. The Forest Service eventually gave these letters a name: conscience letters. Some were long and emotional, filled with apologies. Others were short and direct, asking that the rock be returned to its proper place. In total, hundreds of letters have arrived over the years, some attached to stones that had been taken decades earlier. While there's no scientific proof that the rocks are cursed, the volume of these stories and the consistency of the timing have given rise to a local legend. Some believe the spirit of the land, or even ancient energy within the stones, doesn't want to be disturbed. Others think the curse is psychological, a case of guilt creating bad luck. But even skeptics admit the stories are hard to ignore. Today, signs in the park warn visitors not to remove anything from the site, and for good reason. The petrified wood is protected by federal law, but also perhaps by something else. Whether the curse is real or imagined, the message remains the same. Some things are better left where they belong, and sometimes the past has a quiet way of reminding us that it's not ours to take. 14. The chilling haunting of Michael Jones, when the past refused to stay silent. When Michael Jones moved into his new home, he expected a fresh start, a quiet place to settle in and focus on his work. But the peace he hoped for never quite arrived. The house itself wasn't old. Built just 2 decades earlier, it sat on a quiet cul-de-sac in a seemingly uneventful neighborhood. Yet almost from the moment he unpacked, Michael noticed things that didn't feel quite right. Doors that creaked open on their own, lights that flickered in rooms he wasn't in. Small, harmless things at first, easy to explain away. But soon, the small disturbances gave way to something harder to ignore. Michael reported hearing footsteps upstairs while he was downstairs alone. He would return home to find cabinets open, drawers pulled out, and objects placed just slightly off from where he remembered leaving them. One night, he swore he heard whispering in the hallway, low, deliberate, and just beyond understanding. What made it stranger was the way the house resisted his presence. He said it felt cold in rooms that should have been warm, like the space itself never quite welcomed him. Michael eventually reached out to local historians and discovered something that gave him pause. The land his home was built on had once been the site of an old church, later torn down after a fire in the 1950s. No lives had been officially recorded as lost, but the building's history had faded into obscurity. Still, for Michael, the timing felt too connected to ignore. Out of curiosity and a touch of desperation, he invited a local spiritual advisor to walk the house. According to Michael, the advisor noted a heavy presence in one specific room, as if something unresolved lingered there. She suggested it wasn't harmful, but it didn't want to be forgotten. After a simple cleansing ritual and a respectful acknowledgement of the space's past, the strange activity reportedly lessened. The lights stopped flickering, the doors stopped opening, and for the first time since he moved in, the house began to feel still. Michael never claimed to have answers. He never tried to prove anything, but his quiet story of a man unsettled by what felt like memory embedded in the walls left an impression on those who heard it, because sometimes it's not about what we see, it's about what refuses to be silenced. 13. The Werick Family, Hauntings, Whispers Beyond the Walls. In a small town in Georgia, the Werick family moved into what they hoped would be their forever home. But soon after settling in, they found themselves at the center of a story that blurred the line between imagination and something else entirely. The first to notice something unusual was their young daughter, Heidi. She began describing visits from a friendly man named Mr. Gordy. Her parents assumed he was an imaginary friend, nothing uncommon for a child her age. But Heidi was adamant that he was real. She described him in detail, even pointing to a photograph of a man her parents later learned had passed away years earlier, someone who had once lived nearby. At first, the family brushed off the experience. Children have active imaginations, they thought, but things escalated. Heidi began speaking of another figure, a darker one, who made her feel uneasy. Unlike Mr. Gordy, this presence didn't feel safe. She described cold spots, shadows, and the feeling of being watched, especially in certain parts of the house. Her parents, Lisa and Andy, began noticing strange occurrences too, items moving, doors creaking open, and whisper-like sounds when the house was quiet. The family eventually reached out to local authorities and paranormal investigators. Their story gained attention after appearing on national television, sparking both concern and skepticism. Some viewers believed Heidi was genuinely experiencing something unexplained. Others thought it might be a case of suggestion or stress manifesting in unusual ways. But what made the story so memorable was its emotional core. The Wericks weren't seeking attention or fame. They were a family trying to understand something they couldn't explain, all while trying to protect their child. Over time, the activity reportedly faded, and the family learned to live with a sense of caution, but also peace. Heidi grew older and eventually left behind the experiences of her childhood. But the story of her family's time in that house continues to echo among those who follow real-life hauntings. It's not just about what may or may not have been seen. It's about the feeling that sometimes even the quietest homes can hold something just beneath the surface, waiting, watching, and whispering to those who listen. 12th. Spontaneous combustion, the fire that starts without a flame. Few mysteries are as unsettling and as debated as spontaneous human combustion. The idea that a person could suddenly ignite without any clear source of flame has baffled witnesses, investigators, and scientists for centuries. The reports are rare, but eerily consistent. One of the most talked about cases is that of Mary Reeser in 1951. She was found in her Florida home, reduced almost entirely to ash, with the chair she'd been sitting in mostly gone as well. Yet strangely, the rest of the room showed little sign of fire damage. A small portion of the carpet was scorched, but objects just feet away remained untouched. Investigators couldn't find any open flames, accelerants, or signs of foul play. Then there's the case of Dr. John Irving Bentley, a retired physician from Pennsylvania. In 1966, a meter reader entered his home to check on utilities and discovered a small pile of ashes in the bathroom and one slipper mostly intact. The rest of the body was gone. Once again, damage was limited to a small radius. No flames, no gas leak, no smoking pipe nearby. These cases, and others like them, have puzzled experts. How could a person burn so completely in such a localized area without spreading fire throughout the room? Why do nearby materials seem almost untouched? Skeptics suggest the wick effect as a possible explanation. It's the idea that a person's clothing can act like a candle wick, while body fat serves as fuel. In this theory, a small source of ignition, like a cigarette, could spark a slow, intense burn that consumes the body over hours. But this still doesn't explain the lack of widespread smoke or fire damage often reported at these scenes. And for others, the mystery runs deeper. They point to the strange consistency of the details. Minimal flames, limited charring, no obvious ignition, as something science hasn't quite accounted for. Some speculate about unknown chemical reactions, environmental factors, or rare electrical imbalances. A few even wonder whether it's something we don't yet understand at all. Despite the theories, spontaneous combustion remains a topic most scientists approach with caution. It's not officially recognized as a standalone cause of death, but it hasn't been fully ruled out either. Whether it's an unusual accident or something far stranger, these stories continue to haunt public curiosity, because in each case the same question lingers: how does fire start when no one sees it begin? 11. The mystery of Overton Bridge, the place where dogs jump. In the quiet countryside of Scotland, nestled just outside the town of Dumbarton, stands Overton Bridge, a picturesque stone structure surrounded by lush greenery and misty hills. It looks like something out of a storybook, but for decades it has carried a reputation that's anything but charming. Locals and visitors alike have spoken about something deeply unsettling. Since the 1950s, more than 50 dogs have reportedly leapt from the same side of the bridge, falling into the ravine below. In some cases, the outcomes were tragic. What makes the mystery even stranger is the pattern. Nearly all of the dogs were long-nosed breeds, and nearly all jumped from the same section of the bridge on clear days and under calm conditions. The pattern raised questions that no one could quite answer. Was it something the dogs were seeing or smelling that humans couldn't detect? Was the bridge itself affecting their senses in some way, or was there something else at play, something less easy to explain? Animal behaviorists, psychologists, and scientists have all studied the site. Some believe that the scent of small animals, like minks or rodents in the underbrush below, may be attracting the dogs. Others have pointed to the structure of the bridge itself, which has thick stone walls that might confuse a dog's sense of depth perception. To a dog, the stone barrier may appear solid ground, when in fact, it's a deadly drop. Still, even with those theories, no one has been able to replicate the exact conditions that lead to the jumps. Many locals refuse to walk their pets across the bridge at all, citing its eerie history and the persistent sense that something isn't quite right. Some residents speak in softer tones about the area, saying the bridge carries a heavy energy, that it's more than just a coincidence. In Scottish folklore, Overton Hill is said to be a thin place, a location where the boundary between the physical world and something else is unusually fragile. Whatever the truth may be, Overton Bridge remains one of the most quietly chilling landmarks in the world, a place where science, folklore, and heartbreak all intersect. And still, the question lingers: why here? 10. The Circleville Letters. Secrets, scandals, and a town held hostage by ink. In the small town of Circleville, Ohio, a mystery unfolded that would stretch across years and leave a trail of suspicion, fear, and unanswered questions in its wake. It started in 1976, when residents began receiving anonymous letters. These weren't ordinary notes. They were harsh, handwritten warnings, revealing secrets, accusing people of wrongdoing, and threatening exposure if certain behaviors didn't change. The letters were postmarked from Columbus, but were directed specifically to people in Circleville. And they weren't vague. They named names, cited dates, and described private situations no outsider should have known. One of the most targeted individuals was Mary Gillespie, a school bus driver. The letter accused her of being involved in an inappropriate relationship, a claim she denied. But the letters kept coming, targeting her husband as well. Tragically, just months after the letters began, Mary's husband died in a suspicious one-car accident that many believe wasn't an accident at all. What followed was even stranger. A man named Paul Freshaw, Mary's brother-in-law, was eventually arrested and convicted for attempted tampering related to a letter-triggered incident. Though he denied being the author and the evidence was thin, he spent 10 years in prison. But even while he was behind bars, the letters never stopped. Some were even postmarked while he was still in solitary confinement. Authorities were baffled. The handwriting was the same. The tone was consistent. Yet the person blamed for it was locked away. That fact alone kept doubt alive, and the fear flowing through Circleville. Even after Freshhour's release, no one else was ever charged. Handwriting experts, postal investigators, and even television crews examined the letters, but none could uncover a definitive source. The letters seemed to stop as suddenly as they began. What made the case so chilling wasn't just the tone or the threats, it was how deeply personal the messages were. The author knew things that shouldn't have been public: marital issues, financial problems, hidden relationships. It was as if someone had been watching from the shadows, or sitting just across the table. To this day, the Circleville Letters remain one of the most unsettling, unsolved cases in small-town America. A story not about violence or disappearance, but about control, paranoia, and the power of a pen. And somewhere out there, the person who wrote them still hasn't been unmasked. 9. The Watcher House. When the mailbox became a source of dread. When Derek and Maria Broadus purchased their dream home in Westfield, New Jersey, they imagined a peaceful life in a quiet neighborhood. The house was beautiful, 6 bedrooms, classic architecture, and a tree-lined street. It was the kind of home people work years to call their own. But just days after closing the deal, a letter arrived in their mailbox. It was typed, addressed simply to the new owner, and signed by someone who called themselves the Watcher. The letter started off curious, but quickly turned unsettling. The writer claimed their family had been watching the house for generations. They asked if the Broaduses had children. They referred to the home as if it were alive, and they made one thing chillingly clear: they were always watching. More letters followed. Each one was more detailed than the last, referencing renovations inside the home, things only someone nearby could have noticed. They mentioned the family's children by nickname, described windows and rooms, and even asked if the family had found what was in the walls. Despite extensive investigations, police were never able to identify the Watcher. Neighbors were interviewed, handwriting was analyzed, and even DNA was tested, but no clear suspect emerged. The family, understandably shaken, never moved into the house. Instead, they began renting it out, hoping time would bring closure. But the letters didn't stop. They continued sporadically, taunting, cryptic, and cold. The story caught national attention and was later adapted into books, articles, and even a streaming series. But at its core, it remained deeply personal. A family targeted for reasons that never became clear, in a place that was supposed to be safe. To this day, the identity of the Watcher remains unknown. Was it a neighbor with a grudge, a twisted prank taken too far, or something stranger, someone fixated not just on the people in the house, but the house itself? Whatever the truth may be, the Watcher House remains a chilling example of how fear doesn't always come from what's inside a home, but from what's waiting just outside, quietly leaving a letter in the mailbox. 8. The Premonition of Kathy Hobbs, a warning, written before it happened. Kathy Hobbs was a quiet, sensitive 16-year-old from Las Vegas with a love for books and a thoughtful, introspective nature. Like many teens, she kept journals and wrote letters to help process her thoughts. But one note in particular would haunt those who knew her long after she was gone. Kathy had a recurring fear of something bad happening to her. She even told friends and family that she believed she wouldn't live a long life. It was a feeling she couldn't quite explain, more like a shadow that followed her, quietly whispering that something was coming. One of her letters, written in the months leading up to her disappearance, was particularly chilling. In it, she wrote that if something ever happened to her, she wanted her mother to know how much she loved her. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a goodbye. It read more like a quiet knowing, one that no one fully understood at the time. On July 23, 1987, Kathy left home to walk to a nearby pharmacy. It was a short trip, safe, familiar, but she never returned. The community searched, flyers were posted, interviews were conducted, and days later, Kathy's body was discovered in a remote desert area. Authorities confirmed she had been taken and killed, though the details surrounding the case were handled carefully, especially given her age. The tragedy devastated her family, but what stayed with them, and with the investigators, was the note. A letter from a girl who, by all accounts, had sensed something was coming. It wasn't just eerie. It felt like a warning written in advance, a quiet message from someone trying to make peace with what she couldn't prevent. Years later, a man named Michael Lee Lockhart was convicted in connection with other cases, and investigators believed he may have been linked to Kathy's as well. Still, questions lingered. There was no full closure, only pieces of a story that never fully came together. What remains is the lasting impact of Kathy's words, a letter written not out of fear, but from something deeper, intuition perhaps, or something we don't yet have a name for. Because sometimes a mystery isn't about how it happened, it's about how someone seemed to know it would. 7. The JonBenet Ramsey case, a mystery that never found its ending. On the morning of December 26, 1996, the quiet town of Boulder, Colorado, awoke to what would become one of the most widely discussed and unsettling mysteries in modern history. JonBenet Ramsey, a 6-year-old girl known for her bright personality and participation in local pageants, was reported missing from her family's home. Hours later, she was found within the house itself, setting off a case that would capture national attention and spark decades of questions that remain unanswered. The scene left investigators and the public with more questions than answers. The house had no signs of forced entry. A handwritten note was discovered, and from the very beginning, every piece of evidence seemed to open more possibilities rather than close them. As media coverage intensified, so did public interest and public speculation. But through the noise and headlines, one truth stood still. A young girl's life had ended under deeply unclear circumstances, and the full story behind it remained just out of reach. Multiple theories emerged over the years, ranging from intruder-based scenarios to possible connections within the household. Law enforcement conducted dozens of interviews, reviewed thousands of pieces of evidence, and even turned to advanced forensic technology. But despite efforts from both local authorities and national agencies, the case never reached a definitive resolution. The Ramsey family, under a constant spotlight, maintained their innocence and continued to seek the truth behind what happened. Their public statements, press interviews, and appeals for information became part of the case's complex and emotional narrative. Years passed, books were written, documentaries aired, and investigative specials revisited the evidence again and again. But the central question, who was responsible, remains unanswered. For many, the mystery of JonBenet Ramsey isn't just about the tragedy itself. It's about how a case with so much attention, so many leads, and so many resources could remain unsolved. How something so public could feel so incomplete. Today, her name is more than a headline. It's a reminder of how fragile answers can be, and how sometimes closure never comes, not for investigators, not for families, and not for the millions who still remember. Because some mysteries don't end, they just quietly stay with us. 6. The Gardner Museum heist, a theft that time never solved. In the early hours of March 18th, 1990, as Boston celebrated St. Patrick's Day, 2 men disguised as police officers walked into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum and walked out with a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. The museum, a historic building filled with priceless artwork, had only one guard on duty at the front desk when the supposed officers rang the buzzer, claiming they were responding to a disturbance they were buzzed in, then quickly overpowered the staff and secured the museum for themselves. Over the next 81 minutes, the thieves moved with remarkable control. They avoided many of the museum's most famous pieces, choosing instead 13 works that seemed oddly specific. Among them were paintings by Vermeer, Rembrandt, and Degas, collectively valued in the hundreds of millions. But it wasn't just about the price. Some of the pieces, like Vermeer's The Concert, were so rare that their disappearance felt like a hole in art history itself. In a final act that puzzled investigators, the thieves left behind empty frames where the art had once hung, as if to mark their absence forever. Despite immediate investigation, no suspects were arrested and no artworks were ever recovered. Over the years, countless theories have been explored. International art rings, mob involvement, inside jobs, but no conclusive evidence ever surfaced. The museum itself has never given up. The empty frames still hang on the walls as both a tribute and a challenge, a reminder of what was lost, and of the hope that one day these treasures might return. The FBI has remained involved, and the museum continues to offer a multi-million-dollar reward for information leading to the recovery of the stolen art. Leads have come in, from credible tips to dead ends, but none have led to a full breakthrough. More than 30 years later, the Gardner heist is still considered the single largest unsolved art theft in the world. It's not just a story about missing paintings. It's about how something can vanish in plain sight and remain gone, even when the world is watching. And in this case, time hasn't faded the mystery. If anything, it's only made it feel more haunting. 5. The impossible escape from Alcatraz, gone without a trace. Alcatraz was known as the prison no one could escape. Located on a rocky island, surrounded by freezing waters and strong currents, it was designed to be inescapable. But in 1962, 3 men may have done just that, leaving behind a trail of confusion, ingenuity, and one of the most debated mysteries in criminal history. Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin were serving time for various robberies. All were intelligent, careful, and quietly determined. Over the course of months, the trio used crude tools, like spoons and makeshift drills, to slowly carve through the vents in their cells. Behind the walls, they built a secret passageway, hidden from guards by cardboard and paint. They didn't just disappear into the night. Their escape involved planning. They crafted a raft and life vests from raincoats and glue, and left behind realistic decoy heads in their beds, designed to fool the guards during bed checks. On the morning of June 12, 1962, prison staff discovered the men were gone. A massive manhunt followed, and parts of their raft and belongings were later found washed up on nearby shores. But the men themselves were never seen again. The official story from authorities is that they likely drowned. The water was cold, the currents were strong, and the swim to shore was treacherous. But not everyone agrees. Over the years, rumors surfaced of postcards, blurry photographs, and anonymous tips suggesting the men had made it out and started new lives in South America. The Anglin family, in particular, claim to have received Christmas cards and even a photo they believe shows the brothers alive years later. In 2013, the FBI received a letter supposedly written by one of the escapees, claiming he had survived and was willing to turn himself in under certain conditions. The letter's authenticity remains unverified. Today, the case remains open. The FBI officially closed its investigation in 1979, but the U.S. Marshal Service has kept it active, just in case. Whether they drowned in the bay or vanished into a new life, the truth has never been confirmed. And so, the impossible escape from Alcatraz remains just that, a perfect mystery sealed by water, time, and silence. 4. The Vanishing of DB Cooper, skybound and never seen again. On November 24, 1971, the night before Thanksgiving, a man calling himself Dan Cooper boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle. He looked ordinary, calm. He wore a suit, carried a briefcase, and blended in easily among the other 35 passengers. But shortly after takeoff, the man handed a note to a flight attendant. It said he had a bomb. He quietly showed her wires inside his briefcase and demanded $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck ready on the tarmac in Seattle. His instructions were clear, and his demeanor was calm, never panicked, never aggressive. When the plane landed, passengers were released safely in exchange for the money and parachutes. Cooper then instructed the remaining crew to fly him toward Mexico City, keeping the aircraft low and slow. Somewhere over the dense forests of Washington state, Cooper opened the rear stairway of the plane and jumped. That was the last time anyone ever saw him. The FBI launched an extensive investigation immediately. They searched the woods, questioned witnesses, and tested every lead. For years, they chased down anyone who vaguely resembled Cooper or fit his calm, calculated profile. But the man and the money seemed to vanish completely. In 1980, a break in the case came when a young boy digging near the Columbia River found a decaying package of $20 bills, totaling about $5,800. The serial numbers matched the ransom money. It was the first physical evidence tied to the case, but it only raised more questions. Why was only part of the money found? Where was the rest, and where was Cooper? Some believe he didn't survive the jump. The terrain was rugged, the weather cold, and parachuting at night was risky. But others think he made it, and managed to quietly disappear with the rest of the cash, living out his days under a new identity. Despite countless theories and suspects, the case was officially closed in 2016 without an answer. Cooper's true identity remains unknown. To this day, it's the only unsolved skyjacking in US history. A calm man with a plan and a parachute who walked into the clouds and never came back down. And the mystery of DB Cooper still lingers, drifting just out of reach. 3. The Somerton Beach Mystery, a life erased without a trace. On the morning of December 1st, 1948, a man was found slumped against a seawall on Somerton Beach, near Adelaide, Australia. He was well dressed in a suit, his shoes polished, and his posture oddly composed, as if he had simply sat down and fallen asleep. But he hadn't. Authorities quickly realized the man was no ordinary beachgoer. He carried no identification, no wallet, and not even a hat, which was unusual for the time. The labels had been carefully removed from all his clothing. His pockets held a bus ticket, a used cigarette, and a small metal comb, everyday items, but nothing that revealed who he was. The body showed no signs of trauma, and toxicology reports were inconclusive. Whatever caused his passing left behind no clear trace. Then came the next twist. Weeks later, investigators discovered a hidden pocket in the man's trousers. Inside it was a small rolled-up slip of paper bearing just 2 words, Tamam Shud, a phrase meaning ended or finished in Persian. The words had been torn from a rare edition of a book, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. That very book was later found in an unlocked car near the beach. Inside it were more clues, a handwritten code no one could decipher, and a phone number linked to a local woman. When questioned, she claimed not to know the man, but seemed visibly disturbed when shown his photo. Over the years, theories have ranged from spy stories to tragic love affairs. Some believed he was a Cold War operative. Others suggested he may have been poisoned with a rare substance that left no trace. Despite exhumations, DNA testing, and new forensic methods, his identity remained a mystery for decades. It wasn't until 2022 that researchers proposed a possible name. Carl Webb, an electrical engineer from Melbourne. DNA from the body was matched to distant relatives. Still, even with a name, the questions persist. Why was he in Adelaide? Why erase his identity? And what did Tamam Shud mean in the context of his final moments? The Somerton Beach mystery is more than a cold case. It's a haunting reminder that even in a world filled with records, names, and footprints, it's still possible for someone to vanish into silence. And sometimes the greatest mystery is not how a life ended, but how it was so completely erased. 2. The Lost Colony of Rowanoke, a vanishing that echoes through history. In 1587, over 100 English settlers landed on Rowanoke Island, just off the coast of present-day North Carolina. Their goal was bold, to build the first permanent English colony in the New World. Among them were men, women, and children, entire families hoping for a new beginning. Their leader, John White, returned to England shortly after their arrival to gather more supplies. But his return was delayed by war with Spain, and when he finally made it back to Roanoke in 1590, the colony was gone. Completely. The settlement was abandoned. There were no signs of struggle, no clear evidence of disease or battle. Homes had been dismantled rather than destroyed. Personal belongings were gone. It was as if the entire group had simply vanished into the wilderness. The only clue left behind was a single word carved into a post, Croatoan. The term referred to a nearby island inhabited by a Native American tribe friendly to the settlers. Some believed the colonists may have relocated there. Others feared they had been lost to conflict, famine, or something else entirely. John White searched nearby areas, but bad weather and limited supplies forced him to turn back before finding any conclusive answers. He never saw his daughter, granddaughter, or the other colonists again. Over the centuries, historians, archaeologists, and amateur sleuths have tried to unravel the mystery. Some believe the settlers were absorbed into local tribes, adapting to survive. There have been reported accounts of native communities with English features and traditions, but no definitive proof has ever been uncovered. Excavations have turned up intriguing clues. Fragments of English pottery found miles away from the original settlement, and European artifacts that predate later waves of colonization. But none have told the full story of what happened to the lost colony. The mystery of Rowanoke has inspired countless books, documentaries, and theories, from the plausible to the fantastical. But no matter the speculation, one fact remains. The fate of over 100 people disappeared into the forests of North America without leaving a trace behind. And so, the word Croatoan endures, etched not just into a wooden post, but into American history as a symbol of the unknown. Because sometimes the oldest mysteries are the ones that never truly fade. Number 1. In the fog-shrouded streets of London's Whitechapel district in 1888, a figure emerged from the shadows, never seen, never caught, and never named. The world would come to know him by a name whispered in fear and fascination, Jack the Ripper. The crimes attributed to the Ripper weren't the first of their kind, but they stood out for their brutal precision and the eerie calm that followed each one. Victims were discovered in narrow alleys or behind tenement houses, always late at night, and always with a disturbing sense of control. The person responsible left no clear trail, no confirmed identity, only terror. What made the case so chilling wasn't just what happened, but how the killer seemed to vanish into the very streets he haunted. In an era before modern forensics or security systems, investigators relied on witness reports, hand-drawn maps, and word of mouth. And still, they found nothing. Letters sent to newspapers, some signed Jack the Ripper, added another layer of mystery. Whether they were real or sent by someone feeding off the chaos, no one could say for certain. But the effect was undeniable. Panic spread, headlines flared, and the name Jack the Ripper became legend. Dozens of suspects were considered, ranging from local butchers and doctors to artists and foreigners. Theories stretched from the plausible to the outrageous, but every time the police thought they were closing in, the trail went cold. What set the Ripper apart from other criminals of the time wasn't just his ability to elude capture, it was the psychological hold he placed on a city. Whitechapel residents began to fear walking home after dark. People began locking doors, watching alleyways, and looking over their shoulders. He wasn't just a criminal, he became a presence, unseen, but deeply felt. Over 130 years later, the case remains officially unsolved. Historians, writers, and amateur sleuths continue to dissect the evidence, matching suspects with timelines and trying to decode the mind of someone who seemed to vanish without a trace. But maybe the greatest mystery isn't who Jack the Ripper was, but how he became a symbol, a name tied not just to a series of crimes, but to the fear of the unknown itself. Because in the end, Jack the Ripper didn't just haunt the streets of London, he haunted history. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and to like this video.